Right, what I'm going to do is to describe the differences on the carburetors that's fitted to a Citroën DS and what you need to know in order to set up the mixture and idle speeds. So I've got two carburetors here on the bench, an early type, which is this dirty one, and a later type, which is the shiny one. So here we have, this is an early type carburetor here, the dirty one, and the nice shiny one is a later type. The main difference is that you have a throttle bypass screw on the later one here, which isn't present on the early car. So when you come to set up idle, you use this screw here, which is on the secondary butterfly, which you'll see has got a spring on it, and on this one here you can see it's locked off. So these two screws on the later type are both locked up, so you set the throttle butterflies and then lock the adjusters with the lock nut, and then you don't touch them. Then your only adjustments are your speed, which is the throttle bypass screw here, and the mixture screw, which is the same on both carburetors. So going back to the early type, you set the engine speed on this screw here, and I'll just demonstrate by turning the carburetor over, that when you open the throttle, as it's a progressive twin choke, you can see there you are opening the primary and secondary butterflies, and that the adjusting screw holds the secondary butterfly open just slightly to give you your idle speed. So once you've set the speed, then you will adjust the mixture, which is this screw here, to get the right mixture, and then you are set for that carburetor. Moving on to the later type carburetor, your two adjustments are your engine speed, which is the throttle bypass, and once again the mixture screw, which is in the same position as the other carburetor. I will mention that in order to set your throttle butterflies in the right positions, if it's been mucked about with, you need to get a rough setting, and the setting would be that you unscrew the adjusting screws such that the butterflies shut completely, then you tighten up the screws so they're just touching the tang, and then another half a turn in, and then lock off with a lock nut. So the butterflies are just free in their bores and won't jam, and yet are not passing much air, which means you can then adjust your speeds. If you find that you can't get this idle down because the throttle butterflies might be slightly too open, then you can adjust them. You would set these as I've just described, and then you should be able to get your mixture and idle with the adjustments you've got. Okay, I'm now going to show you how to set up the carburetor, mixture and idles, which on this case, this is a semi-automatic car, so we have two idle speeds, and you also have the mixture. So we need to set the mixture at the slow idle speed. Currently, with the engine sitting as it is, it's running at what would call accelerated idling. So we need to go down to the low speed idling. So the accelerated idling is set on this screw down here at the base of the carburetor, large brass screw. So if we screw that in, this is now the idle that you would be if your foot was on the brake and you were at the traffic lights. And from this position you then set the mixture and the idles at the back of the carburetor. The next thing to do, you do in conjunction with the idle speed and the mixture. The car is now warmed and running, and the screwdriver is now on the mixture screw, and I'm going to screw it in half a turn at a time, listening to what the engine's doing. And at the point at which the engine starts to stumble is the point at which the engine is now, it's slightly too weak. There is the engine is now stumbling, right? So I now back off the mixture screw half a turn, and that is the mixture set pretty much correctly. If you want to get a more accurate reading, you'd need a gas analyzer which you put in the exhaust. So once the mixture is then set, you want to set your idle speed, which on this carburetor is at this position. On the other later carburetors there's a mixture bypass screw, and I have a tachometer in front of me. Now, given that this is a semi-automatic, the idle should be something, in the book it says about 450 RPM, but given that these engines are now 40-50 years old, you're not going to get down as low as that. So you want to set it such that it's an even and reliable slow idle. So this would be with your foot on the brake at traffic lights. This would be the engine speed, and according to the digital tach I've got here, that's just around 600 RPM. So that's quite nice. So once you've set the mixture and then the idles, the slow idle speed, now we can go back to the accelerated idle speed, which is approximately 200 RPM faster than the slow idle. And I have a tachometer here. So in this case, we're looking at about just under 800 RPM. And there we have it. Mixture, slow idle, fast idle. So as part of setting up the semi-automatic gear change on the DS, you need to make sure that this little device is set correctly. This is the CRC, the clutch re-engagement control, and what you need is a very basic pop rivet. This has a 2mm diameter pin, and you'll find that there's a tiny little hole in the body. There might even be a plastic plug in it, and you take that out, and when the car is sitting with it in the idle position, you should be able to slip this pin and it should go right in like that. That means that the CRC is set correctly to the throttle shaft, and that is a prerequisite for having your correct gear change speed between the gears. And when you try and operate the throttle, you'll find it's now locked because you put a pin in. If it does that when the throttle is at idle, your CRC is set in the correct position and you can move on to set the other clutch settings. If it's not and you can't get the pin in, then you need to go and have a look at the other video which describes how you set the CRC in the correct position. So what I'm going to do now is describe how to set up the clutch engagement settings on a semi-automatic DS. There are three basic settings. There's the clutch bite point, then there's the creep, and then there's the intergear clutch re-engagement. And the method I'm going to use for setting up the clutch bite point is what I call the reverse crunch method, which is you select reverse, and if it crunches going into gear, then you need to adjust the clutch. And I'll show you how to do that. That's all done on the clutch fork adjuster. And then we'll move on to the creep speed once you've set that up, which is on this part here, which is the centrifugal regulator. And then finally the gear change speed control in between gears, which is set on the other side of the carburetor on this little device here called the CRC, which stands for clutch re-engagement control. Now if you're starting from scratch, what we do is we'd slacken off the adjustment on the clutch arm in order to get the gear to crunch as you put it into reverse gear, and then tighten it up half a turn at a time until you have no crunch, and that is the right bite point. If you do it the Citroen way, it's all very complicated. You have to put the starting handle in and hold the starting handle as the clutch is engaging, and it's all a little bit complicated. So this reverse crunch method is much easier and easy to understand as well. The reason why we use reverse gear is that it doesn't have any synchro mesh on that particular gear, and so if there's any clutch drag, it'll transmit into the gearbox, turn the shafts, and therefore when you engage gear there'll be a slight crunch. If it's really bad, you get a very noisy crunch. So there are varying degrees of crunch. So that's the basic principle, and I'll now demonstrate it. So I'm now going to adjust the clutch adjuster on the fork here, and this is the first adjusting, which is we're sorting out the clutch bite point. What I'm doing is I'm unscrewing the adjuster because I want to get the gearbox to crunch slightly so that I know where I am in terms of the clutch adjustment. Once we've got it to crunch, then we can wind it in a bit at a time. So I'm undoing it about a turn. It's all trial and error, so we'll see if that now crunches. Okay, so we're in the car, we start it up, and once you've started it up, we need to wait until the hydraulics have built up pressure so you can hear the pump cutting out. The car's just pumping itself up. There you are, it's cut out. Now, foot on the brake, select reverse gear. There isn't a clutch crunch there yet. So we need to adjust the clutch a little bit more, unscrew it a little bit further. So I'm going to unscrew the adjuster further, and I'm going to give it at least a turn this time, and that should be enough. Let's try again. Okay, so into the car, fire it up. Now we just have to wait until the hydraulic pump clicks out, so we know it's up to pressure, which it is. Foot on the brake, select reverse gear, and there's a crunch. In fact, it's crunching in first, so it's quite far out. There we are. So now we know we've got to screw the adjuster screw in. We'll do it half a turn at a time until we get no crunch on the reverse. So, screwing the screw in half a turn, or thereabouts, or you can count the flats. So 3 flats, that's half a turn, and go back and repeat the procedure. So once again, start the car, wait till it's up to pressure, brake, there is still just a slight crunch there, so I'll turn it in one more half a turn and I think we'll be there. So I reckon another half a turn and we'll be at the right point. So there we go. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the clutch release, manual clutch release lever, which is under the dashboard, and what will happen is that this arm will then move back, and the reason for using it is just so you've got more access to that adjuster nut. So under here, where my fingers are, is the manual clutch release lever, which is a little short lever, and it allows you to manually release the clutch. What you do is you push it away from yourself and then push it up into the dash, and that locks it in place. When you do that, it releases pressure from the clutch circuit, and the clutch arm will be pulled back with its spring, and it means that you can then get a spanner on the end of the adjuster nut if it's a little bit more awkward than it otherwise would be because of the proximity to the steering rack. So you must remember, of course, to release that afterwards, otherwise you won't be able to drive anywhere because the clutch won't work. So I've pushed it in. Now to release it, of course, you just put it down and let it spring back. And it's another one of those special little devices that Citroën have provided for semi-automatic cars. So once again, into the car, turn the engine on, let the pressure build up. There you go, regulator cuts out, foot on the brake, and into reverse. No crunch, hooray! So that's where we want to be. So that is now with the bite point set correctly. And now we'll move on to creep. And for doing that, we need the parking brake off. Still got my foot on the brake. I'm going to put it into first gear, and I'm not going to touch the accelerator. I'm just going to see if the car will creep forward very gently as the clutch bites. That's where we want to be. So here we are. It's not quite enough, it's a little bit slow, so we need to make an adjustment. So stop the car. In fact, so slacken off the lock nut, and I'm unscrewing the screw half a turn and then locking up the lock nut. There we go. Right, once again back in the car, let it build up pressure, foot on the brake, release the parking brake, into first, and just take your foot off the brake, don't touch the accelerator. And it is just creeping. I'm still not touching the accelerator, so that to me is not quite enough creep. Yeah, it's slightly different in reverse and first, but that's normal. So another half a turn and I think we'll be there. Right, so this is hopefully the final adjustment. So once again, slacken off the lock nut, and I'm unscrewing the screw half a turn and then locking up the lock nut. There we go. Right, final test, but I think that should be about right. So, handbrake off, first gear, let off the brake. Yep, I'd say that's all right. And in reverse. Yep. Okay, so that's the creep now set. And the third setting is the clutch re-engagement control, which controls the clutch engagement between the gears, and for that we need to drive it. So this device here is called the clutch re-engagement control, or CRC for short, and it's linked to the throttle. That's why it's next to the carburetor, and what it does is control the speed of clutching re-engagement between the gears. We've already described the creep, which is on the centrifugal regulator, and what that does is it lets the clutch out from rest. But once you're moving and you're changing in between gears, the CRC controls the clutch re-engagement. Now you can adjust it by this screw on the end, and it's got this little collar. And this particular one has got a little bolt sticking out of it, which the previous owner has put in, which enables me to be able to turn it by hand. As you see, it makes life a lot easier for adjustments. When you're setting this up from nothing, as it were, you might be unscrewing this several turns at a time. But when you're in the right range, you can be within a quarter of a turn and you can get it that fine. The other thing to point out about this device and where it is that you cannot even get a little stubby screwdriver. You can't get it onto it because the sphere is in the way. So a little trick is to use a washer, which is just the right thickness washer to go in the slot of the screw. And if you want to be really clever, you could cut a flat on the washer. And although there's loads of pipes in the way, which is why I've used two hands, you can see that you can get, hopefully you can see this, you can get this, get the washer into the head of the screw, and then you can turn it manually that way. But with this one, because it's got this little device on it, I'll be using that. So what we need to do now is to drive the car and find out what it's doing in between the gears and adjust that as necessary to get the smoothest gear change that we want. And what I'm going to describe now is how to set the clutch re-engagement control, and in order to do that we need to drive the car. So the procedure is start off in first gear and accelerate up to about 20 miles an hour, and then flick it into second gear, and without touching the accelerator, see how the gear change is. At that point it should be absolutely seamless like a modern automatic, but if it either jerks, then it needs adjustment, and also the opposite is if you then put your foot on the accelerator and it slips and you go like that, then we need to adjust it the other way. So here we go. Now we're on a private road here, so I haven't got seatbelt on and there's nothing coming the other way, so it's all fine. So into first gear and we set off. And there's a slight jerk as it changes into second. So we need to slacken off the gear change. So what I'll do is come to a halt, stop the car, and get out and adjust it. So because the engagement is a little bit harsh and you've got to jerk between gears, I'm going to unscrew this screw half a turn using the little nut that somebody's put on before me. So just unscrewing that. Unscrewing it increases the time of engagement, and screwing the screw in decreases the time of engagement and makes it harsher. So I've done it half a turn, we'll now have a try again. So here we go again. Right, accelerate off into second, and there's still a slight snatch there. Just see if it does it in third as well. Yep. So it still needs to be slackened off. I'll try another half turn. So one more half a turn unscrewed. It is slightly stiff, but that's good because then it won't adjust itself. There you go, half turn. Okay, here we are again. Into first. Still slightly harsh. I'll try another half turn. Yeah, it's getting better, but I want it a little bit better than that. Unscrewing another half turn. Oh. Right, another test. Once more, right. Let's see if it slips. No, that's pretty good. We have a flock of pheasants I'm about to mow down. Come on, you lot, out of the way. Alright, turn it around and see what it's like going back up the road. I'll wait until we're past the pheasants because they seem to be a bit suicidal. Come on, you lot, what are you doing? Alright, okay. Let's go back to where we were. Yes, that's pretty smooth. No jerk. Yep, seamless. As it should be. Just try another one, which is, we'll see the other way, which is to accelerate hard in gear once you change up. So I'll go from second to third and floor it. So it's my foot on the floor and there was no slip, so that's lovely. So that, to my mind, is the clutch now set up just about perfectly.